Hello everyone, I'm iDot, and recently the trade window for this split has officially ended, and well, there was quite a bit that happened there, and I'll get into a bit more just off the start, but let's start with some of the big ones. One of the big ones that really stood out to me was the benching of Turbo Pulsa and replacing him with Illusion. Granted, Illusion, great player, definitely proved that they're one of the best. It just kind of came out of left field for me. Like, Turbo Pulsa, the four-time world champion, definitely a strange choice to put on the bench, especially considering the Envy team. Really, all they needed was to have a consistent roster. Because in the last bit, that roster has been all over the place. And really, they just needed some consistency in the roster to win. But now they're changing it again, so that one's just a bit confusing to me. So, granted, I do think it's a good change, whereas Turbo Pulsa is really good at what he does. A lot of people will agree that he's not as mechanical as people like Illusion, who really stepped up at the last major, or the one before that. So, yeah, that one's. If I had to get it a scale out of 10, it'd probably be like a 7 or an 8. Because Turbo Pulsa, really good at what he does. There's a reason he's a four-time world champion. It's just, he's not as mechanical yet. He's been practicing his mechanics a lot. He's improved a lot. So I think he could definitely be one of the best players on the team. I just don't understand why he was benched. This next benching was another one that kind of was strange to me. It was the replacement of Mark by 8 with Seiko, which I'm not sure how I feel about that one yet, considering that BDS roster had an absolute dominant Season X. They came off the first split of the season doing really good, then they came off of the second one doing really good. But at this major, they struggled in front of a crowd, which is no surprise because they've never played in front of one. That's probably a pretty different experience from playing in your room. But honestly, Mark by 8, all three of those players are some of the best in Europe and in the world. So replacing them with Seiko, it's definitely a bit strange because, again, they're all such great players. Seiko, another top tier player, and I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that this BDS roster is gonna absolutely dominate. But another thing that's also worth pointing out with this roster move is, if you look at it objectively, there's no real reason to change anyone on the BDS roster. They're all top players in the league. They've all had incredible time here. But it raises one thing that I've seen a lot of people talk about. It's nationality. Because not everybody speaks the same language in Europe. I'm not sure if some people know that or not, but there's a lot of different languages. There's a lot of different nationalities. And 2/3 of that BDS roster was French, Mark by 8 being the odd man out. And now replacing him with another French player means that all three are the same nationality. And that kind of raises a domino effect, sort of, where you're going to start seeing the odd man out nationality-wise start to worry in Europe. Because North America, it's really just Canada and America that play, the United States that play there. And most people in those two countries speak English. So there's not a huge concern. But in Europe, you've got dominant countries like England, Spain, France, a couple Germans. There's a lot of players. So it raises that concern for a lot of people who are that odd man out nationality-wise. But it does also make sense. You want players to communicate in their first language. You don't want them to have to take that split second to think of it in their native language and then switch it to the next, because high-level Rocket League, you need everything done as fast as possible. Also, a lot of people were pointing this out that Mark by 8 does not deserve to be on the bench. And honestly, it's a bit of a selfish thing to keep him on the bench instead of letting him go to a different team. Honestly, one thing that I'm really hoping is that we see the rise of the four-man roster. You've got, your three players in, they start off the game, but if they start struggling, you switch it up a bit, maybe give someone new life. It might help. And I'm really hoping we start to see that, especially with this BDS roster, because it's going to be powerful no matter what three players you put in. And the final player we're going to be talking about is Fairy Peak, who was benched after Vitality picked up Radisson, who looks very promising and I'm sure will do great. But Fairy Peak falls in a similar situation to Turbo Pulsa, where they've been with their roster for quite a bit. Their roster's been struggling recently. Whereas it wasn't very clear to me what needed to be done for Vitality. They definitely needed something to change. It just wasn't clear what to me. And again, in a similar situation to Mark by 8, I'm also hoping that this team does a four-man roster because K-Dop and Fairy Peak are both two, I'd say, pretty equally good players. So I'm just hoping those two do well and generally everything goes well because Fairy Peak is a really great player, definitely going to improve, and they came out with a tweet saying that they were going to keep practicing, they weren't retiring, which is really great mentality.